Meanwhile, his family went about their daily routine on the farm. Mom was doing the laundry and talking to her husband while he smoked his pipe. A girl appears outside the farm gate holding a full bucket of water. She walked towards them and notices that her father has arrived from the city. It was Kazuro's sister, Kihiko. She was glad to see her father and wanted to know how Kajuro was doing and what he was doing now. The bucket in her hands was quite large and heavy, which was clearly undesirable for a small and fragile girl like her. The father, seeing that his daughter was carrying a heavy bucket full of water, immediately got scared and ran to her. His daughter was very weak due to illness and did not want to exert herself. Fearing for his daughter's condition, he ran up and grabbed the bucket from her hands, showing his fear for his daughter's condition. Kihiko was very happy to see her father and, hugging his hand, walked with him and asked how he went to visit her brother and what Kazuro was doing now. The father said that Kajuro is now in a closed city and undergoing a test. Kihiko was afraid for her brother, realizing that it was definitely dangerous there and they could kill him. She remembered that Kajuro's absorber abilities were too weak and it was always difficult for him. The parents began to reassure their daughter with the words that Kajuro had already matured and gained experience for such competitions. His absorber level rose, and he even had comrades. The father said that when he saw his son, he even helped the poor and wounded, saving their lives. Kihiko was very touched that her brother had become such a good person. The father, trying not to say too much, tried to change the topic. Otherwise, his daughter, due to her weak body, mostly sits at home and watches the news on the internet. She might suspect something. Kihiko behaved quite modestly and was pleased with her father's story. She was proud that her brother had become very mature and capable of achieving anything in life. Meanwhile, outside the wall of the abandoned city, at the point of the safe zone, there was a large tent, from where light and noise could be heard from loud conversations. Inside, Director Lin watched the competition take place. Yui appeared behind her, having successfully made it out of the city with her comrades. There were many cameras in the city, and the director was watching everything. He wondered what happened to Kajuro and whether he could survive with his group. Director Lin wanted to know what kind of monsters he had absorbed and how many of them he had. The main task was to find out what he found in the crypt. Yui looked at Director Lin and was a little angry that he could not send his people to help seeing how monsters were killing students. Director Lin approached and grabbed Yui by the shoulders and began to say that he did not care about the fate of all those students, like her father. Their task was to find out Kayuro's abilities and understand whether he is dangerous to society. He told her that if he survived, they would find him and end his life. There was no talk of salvation. Having gathered his men, Director Lin begins to leave the tent and move towards the abandoned city to find Kajuro and make sure that he is dead. Yui, hearing Director Lin's words that her father also wanted Kazuro dead, began to suspect that there was something more than just fear about his strength. Meanwhile, in the city, the guys, feeling no problems and in a good mood, walked around the city surrounded by monsters, realizing that no one would touch them. Kazuro asked the guys to stop by another bank on the way and check it out. When they went inside, they saw many empty cells and were a little puzzled. There was no safe here, nor was there any money. Kajuro was angry that they had arrived too late and someone had passed them by. His calm voice hinted that they would already take a lot from this city, so there was no need to worry. But Kajuro was a little offended, since this was a good chance to get even more rich in such a short time. He walked out of the bank door, kicking the stones under his feet. Suddenly they see a man falling from the roof. He breaks in front of the guys and it scares them a little. Kajuro and the guys were surprised and decided to check what was happening, and why were there adult absorbers here. Kajuro, with the help of his red eye, notices that there is a strong commotion going on the roof between the absorbers and the monsters. These were Director Lin's people and himself. They fought monsters on the roof of the building. The monsters pressed them against the fence and did not give them the opportunity to leave. Kajuro, seeing that Director Lin was on the roof, became very angry and wanted to deal with him himself, since he was supposed to have an antidote to wolf bites for Hanami. Director Lin summons his wolves, grabs his comrades, and tries to go elsewhere to search for Kajuro. Some people were attacked by monsters and could not be saved. Director Lin was very selfish towards his people and had no pity if they died. Kajuro was filled with anger and hatred towards Director Lin that he did not want to let him leave. He must fight him and take the antidote. Kajuro begins to run towards the flying Director Lin and tries to chase him. Han and Po were surprised, and did not understand why Kojuro reacted to the director this way. Kojuro runs after the director and says that he must have an antidote for Hanami. It was he who poisoned his girlfriend with his monster. The guys heard that if they could defeat the director, they would save Kazuro's friend. They agreed and began to run after the guy. Meanwhile, Director Lin and his soldiers stood at the crossroads, where there were many corpses of monsters, and they examined the bodies. The director notices that someone very strong is approaching them, as the power of the aura was very dangerous. They were two monsters of the highest level, a monster wearing a suit and gold jewelry, and a monster with a beard and smoking a pipe. Director Lin, seeing such strong opponents, decided to call his wolves and get away, feeling fear away from here. A strange sign very quickly appears on the summoned wolves and begins to flash strongly. This was the effect of Kojuro's red eyes' explosive gaze. The bearded monster with a pipe, seeing a familiar sign, was very surprised that the absorbers were being attacked by the boy who fought against him. A large explosion occurs behind Director Lin and blows up his monsters. Everyone was surprised and did not understand what was happening. Director Lin saw the actions of the monsters that stood in front of him, and they did not use any techniques, so it was someone else, Lin thought. After Director Lin's monsters exploded, he and his soldiers stood ready to fight. Some strange shadow begins to appear in front of them, moving along the ground. Kojuro appears in front of them, running with a sword at them and shouting that he wants to deal with Director Lin. Khan, using his monster, said that he would cover him. When Lin saw the boy, he was surprised that he was still alive, and said that he was glad because he could kill the impudent brat himself. Kazuro decided not to stand on ceremony, and immediately summons two of his attacking monsters to help. Kojuro was very determined to save his friend, and did not want to give Director Lin a chance to win. The three of them begin to run towards the director with a great desire to kill. Lin was greatly frightened by seeing so many powerful monsters near Kojuro. He, nervous and very frightened, begins to roll up his sleeve and call on his monsters for protection and try to fight off such formidable opponents. Two of his monsters, the water and the bloodthirsty monsters, come to the defense of Director Lin. They fight Kazuro's monsters, but their chances are slim. Khan, meanwhile, using his shadow skills, ends up behind Director Lin's soldiers, placing one of his blades on their necks, preventing them from entering into battle. While Han was tying up Director Lin's soldiers so that they would not interfere, monsters were watching them and did not understand what was happening. For the first time, they saw how the absorbers fought among themselves and did not pay attention to them. Realizing that the letter said that no one should touch Kojuro, they thought about whether to intervene and save the guy, while the monsters were thinking about their further actions. Kazuro punches Director Lin in the stomach with a strong blow, damaging internal organs and causing him to cough up blood. The director was on his knees experiencing severe chest pain and could not fight. Kojuro, holding his mighty sword in his hands, walked towards the director, full of confidence and desire to deal with him. The monsters, in the heat of battle, noticed that their master, Director Lin, has been severely beaten and is facing death. Kojuro, in a fit of anger and intense hatred towards Director Lin due to his attempts to kill his girlfriend and harm all his comrades, jumped up for the final blow. Kazuro's incredible power burst out and enveloped the guy's body. His eyes began to glow red and lightning began to shoot from his body from the strong power of the guy. Having fallen under the guy's enormous force before the impact, Director Lin, out of horror, begins to feel his body being slightly damaged and his clothes starting to tear. Kojuro did not attack the director, but pointed his sword at him, intimidating and threatening that he would kill him if he did not give up the antidote. Kazuro did not stand on ceremony with Lin, and, having hit him in the stomach, reminded him that jokes with him were bad, and he would kill a person like him without a shadow of a doubt. Kazuro once again asked the director, "Where is the antidote to the bite of his fucking wolves?" His patience was beginning to run out. Hearing another stupid answer from Director Lin, Kojuro strikes and cuts off Lin's ear, causing severe pain to Lin. Director Lin, having lost his ear and experiencing severe pain, lay on the ground with tears and horror on his face. Kojuro reminded Lin that if he continued to answer like that, he would cut off a piece of his body until he heard the desired answer. The director of the bottom does not believe that the boy can kill a man without hesitation, and continues to defy the guy, expressing his doubts in his words. Kojuro was very angry, and realized that the director was right about something, and knowing that there were high-level monsters nearby, he decided to threaten the director that he would give his soul to the monsters. The director was scared, but still did not believe Kazuro's words. Such an arrogant boy from the bottom would not do such a thing, said Director Lin. The director lay on the floor and did not agree to give out information to Kajuro about the antidote. Kazuro felt that he needed to act more radically and attract more experienced and ruthless creatures. Kazuro started calling out to the bearded monster, and it was very strange. The director, hearing that the boy was calling the monster, got a little scared and tensed. The bearded monster, holding a pipe in his mouth, was very surprised that some guy was asking him to come over. This was very surprising to him since he was the general of an army of monsters. Realizing that they have no right to kill the guy, they decide to approach and find out what he wants from them. The monster in the suit also went with his friend. The monsters approached Kajuro and Director Lin, who was lying on the ground. Kazuro asked the bearded monster to really hurt the director and have a lot of fun with his soul. The monster stood over the director and looked at him ominously. Lin realized in horror that he would not be able to resist such a strong monster after so many injuries. Kajuro was happy and thanked the monster for his help, showing his respect. This confused the monsters a little, and they felt very strange. Director Lin, realizing that now he will be in great pain, decides to grab Kazuro by the leg and beg him not to resort to such terrible torture. Kazuro replies that it is too late and now they can find out where the antidote is using a cruel method. The bearded monster begins preparing his torture whip. Kajuro turns around and moves away from the director so as not to disturb the monster. The director shouts after the guy that he is begging him to stop all this. The monster grabs the director's ugly face by the hair and begins to pull. Lin, in pain and crying a little, begs them to stop. The bearded monster, using his abilities, begins to blow his cigarette smoke into Director Lin's face. Director Lin falls to the ground and begins to writhe in pain. His eyes began to roll back in his head and foam began to come out of his mouth. After much torment, the bearded monster, with the help of his magic, takes out the director's soul chained to the cross. His soul was chained and prevented from moving. This ability of the monster made it possible to kill the enemy's soul without resorting to physical influence on the body itself. The monster, holding a whip in his hands, began to say that now, under the influence of magic, the director will tell all his sins and will be punished with blows of the whip for them. Kazuro asked Director Lin for the last time where the antidote was, but Lin, being terrified, still did not tell Kazuro anything. The bearded monster begins to ask what sin the director committed as a child. Lin recalled that when he was little in the winter he decided to urinate on a cat. He was not aware of his actions and it was funny to him. The cat died and the boy laughed and enjoyed her torment. The bearded monster deals a strong blow to Lin's soul with a whip and sentences that for such an act on the poor animal it is not enough to kill him. Then the director begins to tell another story from student life. He was cowardly from fear and pain, but he could not resist the charms of a strong monster and told him. During the exam, instead of helping his comrades, he watched as they were killed by the monster he himself brought. He wanted to conclude a contract with him, but for this, he had to feed him, and he fed his comrades. After hearing what Director Lin did to his comrades, Kajuro became very angry and knew that such a person did not deserve to live. The bearded monster delivers powerful lashes again for each person eaten by that monster. The director screams loudly in pain and can barely hold on. Po and Han were shocked that he could do this to his comrades. Such a person does not deserve to be the director of the university and is not even there. Kazuro, unable to bear it, begins to kick Director Lin's body, saying that it was he who should have died, and not those poor guys. Lin's soul was cheerfully bound in chains and was severely beaten. His condition was critical, but he still didn't say anything about an antidote for Hanami. Khan showed violent disrespect for him, and in every possible way wanted him to meet the more cruel monsters in hell as quickly as possible. He grabs the director by the neck and wants to look him in the eyes and understand whether such a rotten person really doesn't have a drop of conscience and compassion. But then Kazuro realizes that there is no need to waste his energy and nerves on such a rotten monster, imbued with inhumanity. You still can't get anything out of him. Kajuro turns around and no longer wants to be involved in this matter. He asks the bearded monster to finish with him quickly. The bearded monster said that even he is not as cruel as Director Lin, and would be happy to rid the world of such garbage. Using his smoking pipe, the bearded monster pierces Director Lin's soul with all his might, leaving no chance of survival. His body died and froze in a state of shock. No one will miss such a bad person except his family. Kazuro notices Director Lin's wounded wolf monster nearby and begins to approach him to kill him. A sharp blade pierces the soul of the wolf monster and kills it. Kazuro was calm and cold-blooded. Now he had to find another way to save Hanami. At the site where the wolf was killed, his stone appeared and Kajuro began to pick it up, thinking of selling it later on the black market. Unexpectedly, Kajuro remembers that monster stones can be absorbed, as Han showed then, and thinks that it will help Hanami heal if she absorbs the monster stone that poisoned her. Kazuro, with positive emotions, begins to thank the monsters for their help and says goodbye to them. The bearded monster even smiled, showing his pleasure in what he was doing. By the way, he notices that there are 2 more guys tied up there and they should also take them off to talk. Kazuro replies that he is not interested in them and allows him to do whatever they want with them as payment for their help. With that, they parted ways. The monsters grabbed the corpse of the director and his 2 guards and went in their direction, while Kajuro and his friends went to the exit. Poe decided to ask Kajuro why Director Lin was pursuing them, and why did he poison Hanami? What is happening between universities that they are ready to kill students from other universities? Han said that the director was with guards from a group of absorbers who work for the head of Kento. Maybe he too was one of the members of the absorbers department, Khan thought. Khan remembered that his father once performed magic tricks in the village and staged head-cutting shows at fairs. He was a master of his craft, and none of the residents were ever harmed by him. So, in that village, all the men worked at construction sites, and the main ones there were people from the absorbers department. They were conducting some kind of excavations and building structures for something. Kazuro interrupts Han with the words, why he suddenly remembered his father, and he was a clown. Kazuro replied, smiling. Khan, a little angry, replies that he worked at a construction site but also loved to amuse the villagers, and that made him a pretty good person. Kajuro, putting his arm around Han's shoulder, said that he did not want to offend him, and he strongly supports this decision. People should be happy in difficult situations. After some time, in the office of the head of the absorbers, Kento, there was a secretary who came with a report on what happened in the closed city. The report said that Director Lin and several of his bodyguards were missing. Head Kento, showing no pity for his colleague, waves his hand, causing the secretary to stop reading the report. He already understood that the mission was a failure. He began to think that Kajuro was definitely very dangerous and that he needed to act more radically. His face showed concern that his plans might be thwarted. Meanwhile, Kajuro and his comrades were already approaching the exit from the abandoned city to the safe zone. There were many wounded children around, and some did not return at all. One of the groups of students was intact and ridiculed the others for being so weak that they could not survive and get to the safe zone as a full group. They stood and laughed loudly, showing their disrespect, and were proud of being the first to arrive. The rest of the children, having lost many of their comrades and received various injuries, looked at them with contempt. Kazuro, hearing such laughter and insults towards other participants in the competition, decided to ask such tough guys where they were then if there were so many monsters in the city. The leader of the group of students said that they were smarter and killed the monsters at the beginning of the competition and spent the rest of the time in the open area and did not meddle in the city. Thanks to this strategy, not to go into the city, but to work on the outskirts, they were able to survive. All his comrades applauded their leader and praised his brilliant decision. Kazuro and Han stood with stone faces and understood that this was only suitable for cowards, and if they were faced with a truly strong opponent, they would die immediately. Meanwhile, the head of the Ministry of Education came on stage and announced the final stage of the competition, namely the evaluation of their trophies and the determination of the strongest university this year. The minister asked all the students to come out in their groups one by one and present their catch for evaluation. The best stone sellers in all of Japan were invited to evaluate. They began to take their places at the table and wait for the students. The 2 wounded guys brought only 1 stone and, with a very pitiful and tired face, put it in a plate. The evaluators took the stone in their hands and began to examine it, assessing it as a stone of a low-rank monster. The proud students of the University of the Supreme Devourers, named after Mao Qi, decided not to wait their turn and began to walk, scattering the rest of the participants to the sides. They felt like the winners and the coolest at the university competition, since they were students of the most prestigious university in the city. Proudly approaching the inspectors, the leader of the group, taking off his backpack, begins to pour stones into a plate, smiling proudly. The evaluators began checking the stones and saying that many of them were high-ranking monsters, and this was a worthy result. All the students under the stage were surprised and understood that the Mao Qi Supreme Devourers University had won again, as it had many strong students. The examiner from the Group B school exam was also at the competition, and hoped that the students from his university would be able to achieve a positive result. There was also a teacher from the Mao Chi Supreme Devourer's University who was not very happy for her students. She assessed everyone's skills and understood that such guys had no chance at all against a really strong opponent. From the crowd of students who were waiting for their turn, a hand rose and made the remark that the inspectors had too small a vessel for their extraction. The minister responded to the boy's words and said that he doubted that their stones would not fit into such a plate. A group of disciples from the Mao Chi Supreme Devourers were also surprised. Kajuro asks Po to summon his trash can monster and show them their loot. Po begins to roll up his sleeve and begins to summon the monster with a big smile. A large trash can appeared in front of the students with a strange smile and prepared to open its lid. A huge pile of different stones fell onto the table, and everyone was shocked, since each bead is one monster. All the students who took part in the competition were shocked by this result and did not believe their eyes. They had never even seen so many stones in their lives. The inspector was also shocked to see so many beads of the strongest demons and even wads of money among the stones. Kazuro, realizing that he has humiliated the University of the Supreme Mao Chi Devourers, continues to point out that the vessel is too small and their loot does not even fit on the table. Everyone was surprised by this, and the inspectors, going through the stones, only made sure that they were all received in battles in the next 24 hours. Stones of this quality are very expensive. A teacher from the University of the Supreme Devourers, named after Mao Chi, seeing Kazuro, remembered that he was not allowed to study at the university at the request of Director Lin and the head of the absorbers. She was sure that the boy was very capable. After a few moments, the minister, realizing that no one else could collect stones than the students of the Fu Fel University, makes a decision and announces the winner. This year, the prize for the best university is taken by Fu Fel and its best students. The guys stood on stage and everyone applauded them. Confetti flew around and festive music warmed my ears. After presenting the awards, the guys called a taxi and drove back to their university. The taxi was rushing quite quickly along the road leading into the city. Kazuro encouraged the taxi driver to drive faster and threw money stolen from a bank in an abandoned city. The silhouette of large buildings appeared from the car window. These were the buildings of the Fu Fel University. The sign glowed brightly from the sunlight as it was written in gold letters. Upon arrival, the high speed made the guys sick, and getting out of the car, they started vomiting. Only Kajuro felt good and wanted to see Hanami quickly. Opening the doors of the ward of the medical building, he left very happy to finally get there and tell Hanami that he had found the antidote. Opening his eyes, he saw that the bed was empty and Hanami was not here. Kazuro was very surprised and thought that she was with the director. Leaving the room, he meets the nurse who looked after Hanami and treated him. She said that the girl is now in the library and reading books. Kajuro was delighted and approached his sister, asking her to take the strong monster's stone in gratitude for looking after Hanami. He wanted to see Hanami so much that, without stopping, he finished his words of gratitude as he ran and moved towards the library. The girl stood and looked at the boy and understood that he was in love with Hanami and would do everything to help and protect her. Meanwhile, in the library, Hanami sat in the middle of the room on a round rug and read books. She collected many different books near her and tried to learn something interesting. Kajuro runs into the library and runs towards her with a happy face and loudly shouting Hanami's name. Hanami was scared at first, but she was happy when she saw Kajuro. She stopped him and said that it was forbidden to shout in the library and asked him to be quiet. Kajuro stopped, calmed down a little, and agreed with her. She asked to sit next to him and began to read to Kazuro interesting facts that she had learned during her time in the library. Kajuro sat down next to him and began to listen. Hanami began to reveal that in one book she found an interesting article related to Kajuro or his ancestors. Kajuro didn't believe it at first and said that he doubted it, since his parents were ordinary farmers and had never known anyone from the high ranks of government. Hanami said that maybe he doesn't know everything. Taking his hand, the girl says that back in the tomb, only he was allowed to follow the hall full of warrior statues and obtain the sword monster. Kazuro thought for a bit and said that maybe he had the blood of the ancient kings in him, but that was a very long time ago, and it's unlikely that this means anything anymore. Kazuro took the piece of paper that said about the ancient family that was royal. He read it too when he came to his senses and went to the library after school. Hanami said that she found in one book a story about the city of Fuji, which told about the last royal family that lived quite recently. She started showing photos of that royal family to Kajuro for him to take a look at. The boy in the queen's arms would now be Kajuro's age. Kajuro started laughing and patting Hanami on the head for her wild imagination and skills. She reminded him of a detective investigating a family tree. Hanami removed Kajuro's hand from her head and took it, turning it around with her palm, and began to draw a symbol along his lines, proving that he was that boy. Having drawn the symbol, Kajuro began to look, and his consciousness began to send pictures from the past into his head. He begins to remember his childhood and the day the fire started. He was overcome with horror and the realization that this was really happening to him. When a fire started in the palace, the queen was holding a little girl in her arms, and a boy was standing next to her. A man was on his knee in front of the queen and begging her to run away. She refused and asked to look after her children and take care of them, as they are the future of this country. The man agreed, but did not understand why the queen did not want to leave. She, shedding a tear, was very saddened that the palace was attacked, and understood that if they did not find her body, then they would not leave anyone alone who was in any way connected with her family. The boy did not want to leave his mother and began to cry and ask her to stay. He grabbed her hand and did not want to let go. Mom, kneeling down, began to wipe the boy's tears and reassure him with words that she would always be there, and hoped that he would never let his people and her down, becoming a worthy king. After a tearful and difficult farewell, the man began to get out of the burning city with the children, becoming in sequence their father. Kazuro was pondering such serious thoughts that he could be the heir to the throne of the city of Fuji. Hanami was proud that she was able to find enough information to prove that she was right. She began to rejoice and scream with happiness, for which she attracted the attention of Kazuro, who began to try to calm the girl down. He gave her a cracker and asked her not to make noise in the library. The girl immediately fell silent and, closing her eyes in pain, became a little indignant. Holding her head, she said that it was possible to ask her more gently to be quieter, and not to let go of her hands. Kajuro, clasping his hands, said that he was a prince and did as he wished. Hanami was indignant, and Kajuro tried to get away from his words by laughing it off and blushing a little, humming his favorite song. After the library, the guys moved back to the ward, since Hanami already needed to take medicine. Yui walked towards them. She passed by, but at the last moment decided to greet Kajuro and his girlfriend and congratulate him on winning the competition. She congratulated Kajuro and asked how they dealt with a crowd of monsters while surrounded. Kazuro, not wanting to communicate with her, only replied that it was none of her business and turned away and walked on. Yui felt like she was very much not loved, and it hurt her. Hanami asked Kajuro if it was true that he won the competition. Kazuro replied that yes, he even managed to collect a lot of money for the treatment of Hanami's mother. Hanami, unable to bear it, jumps into Kajuro's arms and begins to hug him and be very happy that he did so much for her mother and herself. Yui felt a very strong feeling in her stomach when she saw Kajuro and Hanami hugging. After that, already in the ward, Kazuro stirred and cooled the soup. He didn't want Hanami to get scalded and experience any pain again. He handed Hanami the soup and asked her to eat carefully. Standing nearby was Sarah, who came between classes to visit them and congratulate Kajuro on their victory and express gratitude for helping to draw attention to their university. Hanami, without waiting much, begins to slurp loudly and strongly, eating the soup without a spoon, simply drinking it. Kajuro and Sarah begin to laugh because Hanami's desire to eat is so great that she even forgot about manners and simply filled a bowl of soup like a pig. After the conversation, Sarah got ready to leave because she had to go to class. She said goodbye to the guys and advised them not to stay up until late, since Kazuro had to go to classes tomorrow. In the evening, Kajuro walked along the road to the dorm after talking with Hanami and spending quality time together. Suddenly, his phone starts ringing. It was his parents. He picked up the phone and greeted them, saying that he was fine and alive. He was glad to hear them, but there was a topic he wanted to talk about alone with his father. Father, sister, and mother began to congratulate Kajuro on his victory in the competition between universities and asked about his condition. Kajuro, trying to find out if his father is really not a father at all, decides to ask about the time when he served the queen and whether he was married to his mother. Hearing such words, the father and wife immediately realized that the boy had probably found out everything and was perhaps in danger. Trying to change the subject and pretend that they don't understand what he is talking about, they decide to give the phone to Sister Kazuro, who wanted to chat with him so badly. Kihiko was glad to hear from her brother and began to ask about his promised life and how many friends did he make during his studies. While the daughter was talking with Kazuro, the father and mother began to think about what to do and how to protect their son from unreasonable actions after what he had learned. Father, thinking what to do in such a situation. And did Kajuro really learn about everything and most importantly from whom? Then he notices a silhouette approaching their house. It was the demon male raven that was approaching their home. He carried in his claws a letter from the great Emperor Insei. The father, taking the letter in his hands, hoped that the emperor already knew that Kajuro had learned the truth about his family and could help. Opening the envelope, he began to read the letter from the emperor and carefully tried to understand. The wife stood holding her heart and hoped that everything would be fine with Kazuro. After reading the letter, the father turns to his wife and says that he has a new task and a good idea on how to protect their adopted son, Kazuro. Having finished a long conversation with his sister, Kajuro began to say goodbye and say hello to his parents and wait for their next call. Walking further down the street, Kajuro notices Director Soda standing with his back to him and waiting for the guy to appear. Kazuro was happy to see the director and said that he had glorified the university, and now more students would come here, having learned how strong we are. Director Sota, not paying attention to the victory, decides to reproach Kajuro, saying that he did not do a good enough job and could have died. Kajuro, scratching his head, was surprised that the director found out that they fought with the head of the city and really could have died, but a letter from the monster emperor saved them. Kajuro with a very serious face and pointed out that the boy still had to train a lot and make progress if he wanted to defeat the head of the absorbers. Without waiting for an answer from Kazuro, Director Sota begins to summon his monsters and teach Kazuro a lesson. 2 demonic monsters of Director Soth's level appear in front of the boy and he becomes very tense. Kazuro began to think that the director was not happy with something if he summoned 2 such formidable monsters to teach the boy a lesson. The director, in a calm tone, begins to say that now he wants to see what the boy is capable of and show his skills so that he is confident and allows him to engage in battle with the absorbers. Kajuro was very frightened and understood that even using all his monsters to attack, there was no way he could resist such demonic monsters from the director. The director, using his high skill in force management, begins to use the ability to reduce force. He reduces the size of his monsters to the size of Kajuro's monsters and limits their abilities so that they fight on equal footing. Kazuro, seeing that the monsters have become weaker, assumes that after the competition he will be honored at the university and shown gratitude, and not challenged to a duel. Director Sota looked at the boy and said that this would be his reward for winning the competition. Fighting the director is a reward in itself. Kajuro agrees and begins to run towards the director, preparing to attack and creating sketches of a strategy for the battle in his head. He summons his monsters and thinks about where the weak area of Director Sota's monsters is to attack them. Summoning a monster with a chainsaw and a buxom beauty, Kazuro sends the saw to attack as a distraction, while the busty beauty, using her musical instrument, the zither, begins to play a stunning melody. Director Sota and his monsters react in time to such a sound wave and jump back to a safe state. Kajuro notices that the director knows at what distance his monster's abilities operate and understands that he needs to come up with another way to attack. While the monster with the chainsaw was running, trying to divert attention to Director Suta and his monsters, Kajuro also began to run behind him to attack. Kajuro calls the rest of the monsters and thinks to use the encirclement method and take the director's monsters by surprise. While Director Sota and his monsters jumped away from the sound wave of the busty monster, Kajuro and his monsters tried to come in from several directions and attack the director. The director noticed all this and understands that the boy has an understanding of strategy and is quite capable, but he is still damp and weak. A warrior in golden armor attacks a monster with a scythe, but he parries the blow without even straining. The monster with the chainsaw has also come quite close and uses its chainsaw attack on Director Soth. But the monster with the scythe manages to react and repel the attack of the monster with the chainsaw using his combat weapon skills. After the attack is repulsed, Kazuro's monsters decide to attack at the same time and hit the scythe-wielding monster with their weapon skills. The writer's monster uses his powers and makes the chainsaw monster slip and lose his body balance. The monster with the chainsaw feels that his body is starting to fall to the side, and he can no longer control it and falls. A warrior in golden armor, in the heat of battle, notices that a huge monster begins to fall towards him and does not have time to dodge. A monster with a saw crushed a warrior in golden armor with its body. This made him very angry, and he began to tell the monster with the saw to quickly get off him and not disgrace them. Director Sota, standing over two lying monsters, was very disappointed with such weak attacks from the boy and advised him to more competently evaluate the enemy. After such a pathetic attack, the director decided to test what his defense is capable of and asks his monster with a scythe to attack the boy. While the attacking monsters were lying on the ground and trying to get up, a bone monster with a scythe was already running towards Kajuro and trying to attack. Kajuro notices this and realizes that he must make a quick decision and repel the attack. He begins to summon the sword monster's sword. The sword begins to appear from the boy's hand and is immediately ready for use. Kazuro, trying to fight back, immediately attacks the monster running towards him, but the skeleton manages to dodge and prevent himself from being caught. The skeleton's stance with a scythe confused the boy, and he thought that the monster simply dodged, but he was covering another monster that was preparing the main attack. Kajuro understands this, and when he saw that the writer's monster was preparing to strike, he was very afraid that he had miscalculated and did not understand the enemy's plans. The writer's monster throws its ink pencil at Kajuro using the magic of enhancing and accelerating the object. Kajuro realizes that he won't be able to dodge and therefore tries to fight him off with his sword. But the speed is too fast, and the boy may not make it in time. He tried to use the red eye skill to weaken the monster and prevent him from controlling the item. But the monster was too smart and closed his eyes when he saw that the guy's red eye began to light up. Kajuro realized that he had been too naive to hope that everything would work out for him if he fought the way he always would, but he had miscalculated. The ink brush slammed into Kajuro's stomach. The boy experienced severe pain and had a strong expression of fear and awareness of mistakes on his face. The boy flew several meters away and fell to the ground. The strong blow caused quite a bit of pain to the guy, but did not break anything. Kajuro felt a little like he was in pain, but he didn't intend to lose like that. He began to think about what to do. The director began to tell the guy that he was too impulsive and did not think with his head when he attacked. There are too many emotions, and this makes it difficult to correctly assess the enemy. Kazuro, listening to the director's advice, having caught his breath a little, realizes that he needs to find a way to break through the enemy and decides not to hesitate. Having risen to his feet, the boy immediately began to run towards Director Sota with his monsters and try to attack him. Having used his blade, Kajuro decides to increase its power and uses a large supply of magic to strike. The writer's monster was too experienced and smart and, using his brush, decides to hit the guy first while he is gathering strength to strike. Kajuro gets hit in the head and stops. He received, but did it in order to divert attention, while he is attacked from behind by his stink monsters in golden armor and a monster with a chainsaw. But the writer was much smarter than the boy and suspected the same. The writer jumped away from the attack and avoided damage. The warrior and the monster with the chainsaw did not have time to react and missed. Kajuro teamed up with his monsters and began to tell the plan for the attack and who should do what. He suggested attacking together, taking him from different sides and giving our girls the opportunity to stun him and immobilize him. The warrior in golden armor and the monster with a chainsaw were very angry from so many losses that they agreed to do anything if it would give them the opportunity to win. After several battles, Kazuro's squad was defeated again, and Director Sota and his monsters stood without experiencing the slightest problem in battle. Kazuro, wiping sweat from his face and blood from his wounds, suggests that it is impossible to win against such a strong mentor with his incredible monsters. The director said that if the boy resorted to a more reasonable battle strategy and divided his monsters into groups to attack from different sides, then the boy would have a chance. Kajuro began to shake his head, disagreeing with the director and showing that such a strategy would definitely not work against him, as well as against the soldiers of the head of the absorbers. The director was surprised and said that this was a good strategy, and one should not underestimate his knowledge. He used one himself when he was young. The director began to explain that if the boy does not take his head and start thinking normally in battle, then he has no chance in battle with the soldiers, and even with the head of the absorbers. He grabbed Kajuro by the t-shirts and began to explain in a more rude manner that his life and the lives of his loved ones depended on it. If Kajuro continues to attack the enemy so thoughtlessly, he will most likely die very quickly. After several seconds of rude treatment, the director quickly changes his tone and, holding the guy by the shoulder, begins to say that he will still learn and the director will help him with this. Kajuro began to smile a little in bewilderment They continued training, and this time Kazuro's monsters captured Director Sota's monsters in their pincers. Kajuro decided to take advantage of the situation and attack them from above with his powerful sword while they were distracted by their surroundings. Kajuro was approaching the enemy from a height, but the monster with the scythe notices him and tells the monster to the rider about this. Kajuro receives a strong blow from the leg of the rider's monster and flies off. The monster says that such attacks cannot penetrate him, and Kajuro need to think better. The training had been going on for several hours. All the students around could have come running to such loud sounds of battle. Kajuro and the chainsaw monster fought the scythe monster. After another attack, Kajuro almost lost his head after blocking a monster with his monster's scythe. Kajuro was already severely crippled and tired, but he had more persistence and did not plan to stop. Meanwhile, Hanami and Sarah came out to watch Kajuro's training. They sat at a table and talked. Sarah smiled and told Hanami that Kajuro was a great fellow and a true friend. He does so much for her and doesn't even suspect that someone likes her. Hanami tried to pretend that she didn't understand, which made her a little nervous, and said that they were just friends. Sarah began to laugh and say that, of course, a friend, and there was nothing else in her thoughts than to embarrass and reveal Hanami's feelings for the boy. Meanwhile, Kazuro tried to somehow strike a blow at the monster rider and win at least once, but the next attempt ends with Kazuro being kicked in the face, and the boy flies away from the pain and force of the blow. From the blow, the boy lost a tooth and blood sprayed from his mouth. His body was like a rag, all wrinkled and dirty from falls. Kajuro was not taken aback by his injuries, but told his warrior in golden armor that now it was their turn to attack. The monster, lowering his head, notices that he is surrounded by two monsters and did not notice this when he beat the boy. The actress's monster begins to use her ability to stun, singing high notes in her voice and trying to influence the consciousness of the writer's monster. Meanwhile, a warrior in golden armor prepared to strike at the writers and finally gain his first victory. But the writer's monster was ready, and said that the attempt, of course, was good, but it was not enough for victory. Using his abilities, he suppressed the power of the actress's form and cast an attack spell in her direction. Kazuro was once again defeated, and his monsters could not cope. In the background, his girlfriends tried to support him and watched him. Hanami stood up and clutched her heart, worrying for Kajuro that he would get too many injuries. Sarah reassured her by saying that Director Sota was careful and experienced enough to inflict this kind of injury on the boy. While Director Sota's monsters were fighting Kajuro and his monsters, a loud clattering sound of a crowd of monsters was heard from the forest behind him. It was the monster of the bride with her warriors, and she ran to help Kazuro, since her servants reported to her that they were spying and observing in the area that Kazuro was being beaten. The girls notice that a crowd of monsters is running here and are very scared. Hanami notices that the girl at the head was shouting, "I will save you, my hubby!" She didn't quite understand who it was addressed to. The bride's monster and her monster with a large cleaver attacked Director Sota to kill such an arrogant old man that he dared to offend Kazuro. The director, noticing the approach of the enemy, tried to jump away and told the boy that he would deal with them himself. Kazuro, seeing his bride, tries to stop her and grabs her by the dress, shouting that this is his mentor and they are training. Unknowingly, Kazuro tears the monster bride's dress and exposes her body a little, thereby embarrassing her a little. Kajuro, realizing what he did, tries to apologize and hopes that she will forgive him. She thought that her husband, from the long separation, probably missed her so much that he began to tear her clothes and wanted to quickly fall into passionate embraces. Kazuro, listening to all this nonsense, tried not to drop his jaw from such wondrous thoughts of such a beauty. Hanami, seeing Kajuro talking to the monster and tearing her dress, only became more perplexed by what was happening. He suspected that Kajuro had known such a beautiful monster for a long time, and they did not have a hostile relationship. Kazuro, while talking to the bride, begins to feel an awkward feeling that he has done something wrong. Hanami in the background is completely indignant and very jealous, although she has not confessed her feelings to him. The monster of the bride, blowing a kiss to the boy, wants to go further to the old man and teach him a lesson for mocking her beloved. Kajuro screams and asks her to stop, since this is his teacher and this is how they train. The girl, scratching the back of her head and seeing that she is only upsetting her hubby, begins to understand that this is all true and no one is threatening her lover. Kazuro, hearing words of understanding from the bride, begins to sigh with relief. The bride begins to shout to her soldiers to stop attacking the old man and return back to their positions in the forest. The monsters, having heard the orders of the bride and their leader, were very surprised that everything had changed so quickly, and they would not be able to kill and devour the old man. The vampire and the monster with the cleaver were puzzled, but they could not argue with the decision of their queen. Director Sota stood surrounded by monsters and heard that Kajuro was negotiating reconciliation with some monster. But the conversation was too frank and with more loving actions. This greatly surprised the director and gave rise to very strange thoughts and questions for the boy in his head. From the director's awkward question about the monster who is so ardently trying to hit on the boy, the bride bursts with emotion and begins to shout at the old man and say that this is her husband and no one should insult and humiliate him. Otherwise, he will have to deal with her. Kajuro tried to calm them all down and stop this whole circus. The girl listened to Kazuro and, clinging to his chest, began to ask him to go with her and continue what they started on their wedding night. Kazuro felt awkward and understood that he did not want to deal with the monster, but tried to explain that he still had too much work and training to become a worthy husband. The girl understood everything and, feeling pity and resentment that the boy was again too busy to devote time to her, turns around and, wiping her tears with a handkerchief, goes into the forest with his soldiers and monster generals. While Kajuro was saying goodbye to the monster bride and the rest of the monsters, Director Sota appeared behind him, very angry and not understanding what it was all about. His gaze showed great surprise, and he wanted to teach Kazuro a lesson again. The boy felt the director's cold, piercing gaze on him and was very frightened, feeling the sweat on his face. Director Sota begins to use his abilities and suggests intensifying the training. He exuded a strong magical aura and showed incredible abilities in his abilities. He summons another monster with a large shield, which immediately begins to attack Kajuro. Seeing a large shield rushing towards him, the boy manages to jump to the side and dodge the blow of the shield. But the monster was quite a strong and experienced warrior. Seeing that the boy dodged his attack, he immediately used his powerful hand and hit the guy before he expected it. Kajuro, having received such a strong blow, felt that his bones would soon not be able to withstand it and would begin to break from a hail of attacks and unsuccessful attempts to attack Director Sota's monsters. The director, seeing the guy's condition, decides to stop the training and, standing with his back to him, tells him to get ready for tomorrow, but for now he can go and rest. Kazuro, sighing heavily from fatigue and pain, realizes that it's finally over, and he can rest. Hanami runs up to Kajuro after hearing that the training is over and begins to help him come to his senses and get up. She gently begins to wipe his face with a napkin and tells him that he needs to get a good rest and see a doctor, afraid that there may be more serious injuries. Sarah, laughing and encouraging the boy that he lasted longer than anyone trained by Director Sota, advises spending more time assessing the actions and abilities of the director's monsters and finding an approach to them in order to attack. Kazuro, having heard the advice, thanks Sarah and agrees to look into this issue. Sarah remembers that she was very curious. What kind of monster was it that threw herself so hard into Kazuro's arms and gently whispered all sorts of words into his ear? Kazuro, realizing the awkwardness of the situation, is very surprised and tries in every possible way to avoid answering and not tell the girls what happened to him in the forest when he wanted to test the capabilities of his monster swordsman, saying that she was just an old acquaintance, whom he took pity on and did not kill, but in return, she agreed to help fight the monster in the forest, which was greatly bothering her. Sarah started laughing, pretending to believe the boy. Hanami does not understand what is happening and wants to hear a specific answer. Who is this girl for Kazuro, and why did she behave so depravedly with him? Kajuro became very tense and began to think about what to tell her. Kazuro, rubbing the back of his head, begins to say that this is all really true and she just helped him fight a strong monster in the forest. His appearance showed him and proved that the boy did not know how to lie properly. All his attempts to stop this conversation and go to rest were in vain, and the girls won't let him go so easily until they find out the truth. Kazuro says that this was so and he did not come to her house or spend the night there. Hanami, hearing such words, tells Kajuro that he himself is giving away the information that he hides so much. Sarah begins to tease Kazuro with words. What was he doing in the house with such a beautiful girl, and how did he sleep? Hanami did not yet understand what Sarah was leading to, and simply listened to what Kajuro had to say. Kazuro, realizing that his attempts to lie are only making the situation worse, stands there, biting his tongue and nervously trying not to say anything more, so as not to be driven into a corner even more. Hanami, blushing from guessing, begins to demand that the boy tell everything and not lie to her anymore. Otherwise, she will stop talking to him. Kajuro, seeing Hanami's strong dissatisfaction and Sarah's interested look that she already suspects, decides to tell everything as it happened. He began to tell a long story about how he received the power of the sword from the crypt, where he fainted and then woke up in the infirmary. The director called him to the roof in the evening, where he told him about powerful monsters who could help conclude a contract with the swordsman's monster by letting them kill themselves. Kazuro ran cheerfully towards the monsters and came across a vampire, who agreed to take him with him to the house of the bride who was getting married that evening. The bride was the most powerful monster in the forest, and Kajuro thought that she was the one who could kill him. Once at her house, Kazuro tried to find her and try to provoke her into a fight. Entering the room, he saw a girl with a veil and thought that this was the bride. Raising the veil, he began to ask to fight with him and kill him. The bride began to talk about some ancient traditions and refused to kill the guy, but said that he was now the groom. Kazuro was very frightened and not ready for such a turn, but he could not escape. The bride used her charms and put the boy to sleep, and in the morning he woke up very tired and exhausted. And then he came to the hostel having run away from his bride in the morning, and that's it, while the girls stood with their mouths open and tried to understand what the boy told them. Kajuro took advantage of the moment and began to run home to rest and get some sleep. He waved to the girls and said goodbye to them, wishing them good night. The girls were very puzzled, but Sarah began to tell Hanami that Kajuro clearly experienced new sensations from that evening, but did not remember since he was passed out. Hanami stood with her eyes wide open and didn't quite understand what Sarah was hinting at. After thinking a little, Hanami became very angry and began shouting after Kajuro so that he would come back and tell her the truth about that evening. She was very worried that Kajuro had already found a girlfriend and even a monster with whom he probably had something. Kazuro ran to the dorm and smilingly said that if he didn't remember anything, then nothing had happened. Let them not worry about the monster's girl. She herself knows that nothing will work out with a person. This only surprised Hanami more, and she was filled with different thoughts that she already thought that Kajuro was married to a monster. Hanami stood a little saddened and blushed with shame that she could think very scary things for her related to Kajuro and that monster girl. Sarah stood nearby and began to hint to Hanami to tell the boy about her feelings for him in order to resolve this issue and not worry anymore. Meanwhile, Kajuro had already reached the dorm building. It was already late evening, and many of the students were already asleep. Kazuro went up to his floor, went to the door, and began to open it. Entering the room, he notices Po sitting on the bed and quickly begins to hide something with his hands. Kajuro was a little surprised and asked him what he was doing. Po, smiling, begins to say that after Kajuro gave him Sarah's number, he thought for a long time about what to write and decided to send one funny photo. Kazuro, thinking for a while, remembers and tells him not to overdo it and throw something unnecessary. Po reveals that he wrote her declaration of love and desire to meet, describing the feelings that he felt when they first met, and saying that he had always dreamed of someone like her. Po decided not to hesitate, and laid out a piece of his body. Kazuro, hearing that Po didn't understand what he was doing, asked to urgently delete it, otherwise he would have big problems tomorrow. He felt that Po did not know how to hit on girls, and therefore gave him a completely different number. Po sat with a very concerned look, and waited for Sarah to write to him, not suspecting that Kajuro had set him up and given him a completely different number. There was a package of napkins next to him, and Kazuro decided to go to the bathroom to take a shower without seeing what could be disgusting. Suddenly, Po receives a message from the one he loves so much. It was Director Sota's number, and he sent a response in the form of the same photo, which greatly upset Po. He sat in horror for now, not realizing that Kajuro had played such a joke on him. Kazuro was at the shower table, and while washing himself, he heard Po's screams and his disappointment that Kazuro gave him the director's number. Kajuro laughed with all his might and realized that this was the best joke of his life. With nervously shaking hands, I tried to delete the correspondence and photo, but they had already been viewed and it was in vain. Po began to write words of apology and make excuses so that he would not be punished tomorrow for such a mistake in front of the director. Po was so scared that, remembering that it was Kazuro who gave him the number, he started screaming very loudly and swearing at Kazuro, throwing his phone on the floor and making a lot of noise in the dorm. Khan woke up from Po's strong screams and grabbed his sword, thinking that monsters had attacked and thinking of intervening and helping repel the attack. His gaze, full of determination to action, showed to attack the monster, but when he saw an irritated Po throwing his phone in all directions and shouting all sorts of nasty things towards Kazuro, he was surprised. Meanwhile, Kazuro, while washing in his soul, felt great pleasure from such a joke on Po, and realizing that it was too early for him to start relationships with girls like her, he decided to give the director's number, but did not even imagine what it would lead to. The next morning, Kajuro decided to go up to the roof and upgrade his monster's skills and prepare for the evening's training with Director Sota. Kajuro summoned his chainsaw monster and decided to improve its attack skills first. Using his stones that he collected from competitions between universities, Kajuro begins to absorb their power into the chainsaw monster, raising its level and strengthening its skills. The monster with the chainsaw began to feel a strong increase in strength and power that his desire to kill only intensified, and with joy he began to scream loudly and enjoy such power. The loud screams of the monster woke up some of the guys, and Khan, unable to bear such noise in the morning, decided to go out onto the balcony and find out who it was on the roof screaming so loudly. He was very angry because he wanted to sleep and relax before studying after the competition. Han, seeing that it was Kajuro with his monster, was very surprised and did not know how to react. Kajuro apologized for the noise and promised that it would not happen again. Khan pretended to believe it, agreed, and went back to bed, realizing that none of this would most likely work out. Kazuro approached his monster and asked him not to scream so much anymore, since there were a lot of people here who needed to rest. The monster, sensing an awkward situation, agrees and tries to remain calm. Kajuro continued to imbue the monster with his monster power stones and increase the attack stats of the chainsaw monster. The monster, absorbing the power, became a little larger and more ferocious. After strengthening the chainsaw monster to its maximum levels, it reached a new level of strength and became quite a strong opponent for Director Sota's monsters, Kazuro thought. After such an enhancement, Kajuro absorbs it back and thinks about who to improve next, assessing his strength and abilities in battle. Kajuro begins to remember and imagine what battle strategies he should use and what he might need in battle. He decides to improve the performance of a powerful sword in order to improve his abilities as a swordsman and better strike and block attacks from monsters. Strengthening will require quite a lot of power stones, but fortunately, Kazuro had plenty of them. Kazuro, having strengthened the abilities of the sword, began to feel a greater surge of strength and a more tense and muscular body. Such a sword was capable of strengthening its owner visually and physically. He notices slight changes in his body, increased muscle mass, and better sword skills. Kajuro thinks that these are very good reinforcements and will allow him to fight back against Director Sota's monster. Testing his abilities, Kazuro notices that the sword in his hands began to feel lighter, and the blows became faster and stronger. He could now better control his body while wielding such a sword. After strengthening some of his monsters that needed it most, Kajuro decided to go back to his room and get ready for the evening's training. He walked with a light and relaxed gait, feeling that now he would have a chance to win. Finally, it was time for training, and Kazuro showed up after school to fight. He wanted to demonstrate to Director Sota his new abilities, and that his training had not been in vain to prove that he had enough strength to fight the head of the absorbers. The director immediately points his finger at Kajuro and begins to tell him to prepare for battle. Today it will be much more serious and dangerous than yesterday. Kajuro, having heard such words, was a little scared, but he was not going to wonder and was preparing for this. The director lights a cigarette before the fight and gives final instructions to Kajuro so that he prepares for the fight and uses his skills with dignity. Kajuro, having learned his lesson from yesterday's training, was ready to fight Director Sota's monsters. The director began to tell the boy that he was still too young and inexperienced to fight with the head of security, and it could take years of training for him to show a worthy fight. And the director will have to see that the boy is really ready for such a fight in order to let him go. The director quite seriously said that the head of the absorbers is very dangerous and owns very strong monsters. He is capable of defeating many absorbers alone. Kajuro must work hard and prove to Director Sota that he is worthy and will not die in the first minutes of the fight. Kajuro looked quite determined and asks the teacher not to cut him any slack and to fight him for real. Only then will he feel the real combat experience and prepare for the fight with the head of the absorbers, Kento. The director, having heard the boy's request, agrees, feeling that the boy was preparing and drew conclusions from yesterday's battle. He begins to use his abilities and summon his monsters. It was a writer's monster that already looked quite formidable, since its characteristics were not cut down, but were completely ready for a fight with Kajuro. He was already ready to write down spells for battle in his book and use them without a twinge of conscience. The second monster was a skeleton with a scythe. His eyes glowed menacingly and were determined to attack. The fighting abilities of such a monster were at the highest level and alone were capable of destroying an entire army of monsters. And the third monster was a monster with a shield that was capable of demolishing opponents at great speed without receiving damage due to the power of the shield, which could not be penetrated. Director Sota was determined to show Kajuro what his monsters were capable of, and to test how long the boy could hold out after being attacked by such monsters. Kajuro tensed a little, but did not show fear, but proudly rolled up his sleeve and began to summon his monsters to fight. His only concern was that if he trained poorly, he would not be able to kill the head of the absorbers soon and would waste time. The battle began, and both groups of monsters rushed to attack. Kajuro, calling on his sword, also ran into the attack and was ready for the abilities of Director Sota's monsters, since he already knew them all by heart. This will be an exciting fight that will show how much Kajuro has grown in his abilities.